for it to. Okay, I'm going to head over to YouTube and get the link, and then I'll post that in here.
Awesome.
Oh, I forgot to do that, didn't I? I forgot to post the link here. Hi, Miss Christy Cox. We are just getting this all announced here. Whoops, I did that in the wrong. Here we go. All right, there. That's in the private chat now.
There you go. Awesome. Thank you.
So if you can just be, oh, wow, we've got 3 people here. So just give us a couple of minutes, guys, and we will get going. Wish there was an easy way to do it. Like you have to like actually go live to get the link.
I know. Yeah.
Creates this awkward moment.
They don't want to make it easy for us.
Okay, everybody's all announced. And so, okay, thank you for those of you who are sitting there patiently waiting. I am Machine Pun Kelly, and today I have a big announcement to make. Where in the world is Nahan San Diego? She is right here with us. She is my new co-host. I always, everything I've ever done, it's like I always do it better when there's a like detail-oriented person to like fill in my cracks. I always say there's 2 types of people in the world. There are people who get things done now, and there are people who get things done right. And I'm kind of a now person. Like I will just get it going and then figure it out as I go along. I don't, get too bothered by my mistakes, but it's always helpful when somebody can point them out and fill in the gaps and, metaphorically cuff me up the back of the head and get me right. And so Nahan is that person for me. She's done previous podcast experience, and she actually has already just in her first episode taught me about a dozen things. So I'm really looking forward to spending more time with her. Nahan, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. Hey guys, who all is here? Thank you guys for joining us. As Kelly said, my name is Nahan. I'm super excited to be here on the Pun Show. You know, I come from a space deeply rooted in Appalachian Mountains of East Tennessee, where, you know, really immersed in some awesome culture and community, but in a very small blue dot in a very, very red state. So with that, you know, this has helped me to be able to tackle some difficult topics and conversations. And I think that it's important that we're doing that with some honesty and compassion. You know, I feel like what I'm most excited to be doing here is shedding the light on what I think what it means for us to be progressives without letting the right actually be able to define us by trying to make us into a parody. You know, I think that, you know, we can have some meaningful solution-focused conversations that aren't just reactionary, but are reflective of what our values are as progressives. You know, I hope that we're going to be able to bring in professionals that can provide that factual basis for, you know, understanding certain topics, but then also sharing, you know, what real Americans are going through and experiencing. Because, you know, while I think it is super important that, you know, we're informed by the facts, sometimes we forget the human element behind every headline that's allowing for people to use their empathy and compassion and, you know, have those discussions with humility rather than, you know, being argumentative. So, you know, I look forward to diving into a lot of these topics and meeting with a bunch of amazing guests and hearing these stories. And I'm thrilled to see what we have planned for the future. So thanks you guys for joining us.
So the other person I'd like to introduce you to is our guest today. Her name is Dr. Karin Tamerius, and she is a political psychiatrist, which was not a thing I knew existed until recently. I from like reading up a little bit about her, and in large part thanks to Nahan's research. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I've kind of come to think of her as maybe a MAGA whisperer, if you will. Like, how
Yeah.
do you talk to MAGAs? And I don't think, you know, and when I announced this topic on Blue Sky, there was a lot of reaction to I announced, you know, are you dreading Thanksgiving dinner because your MAGA family members are gonna bring an extra serving of gloat gravy, and you just don't want to deal with that? And a lot of people very much don't want to deal with that, and they basically are saying they don't want to deal with the family members ever again. They're just cutting the MAGAs out of their lives. And in a lot of cases, where it's like they have trans children who are transgender or gay or female, you know, there's a lot of I can understand why that is. Like, you just voted against my children existing. So how would you respond to that? Oh, and also, I'm sorry, before we get going, would you like to introduce yourself a little more?
Sure. I'll say a few words, but I think you did a pretty good job. In addition to being a political psychiatrist, I'm the founder of Smart Politics, which is basically an organization that teaches progressives how to have more productive conversations, more persuasive conversations with people we disagree with, including Republicans. Sometimes the conversations we need to have are with each other, but a lot of times it's with Republicans. The other thing I'd say is I've also created a bunch of chatbots, including AI chatbots that are designed to let you practice before you have conversations with real people. And we can provide those links later. So if you're really scared about doing this in person, there are ways to prepare without actually testing it first on live family members. As for your question about I guess what you wanted to know is like, why do this with people at all? Like, why not cut off relationships? Is
I
that
think
right?
there's a lot of people who are asking, are just saying that that's their plan. They don't want to have anything else to do with them. And is that healthy, do you think? Or I mean, or is it?
Yeah, I think it's healthy in the short term. Like, it is okay to take a break for a few days and to step back, think about your relationships, think about what you need, think about your personal boundaries. What is not healthy is to sever those ties completely. And I think of this in two respects. One is from a personal, private relationship perspective. Families are the most important people in our lives. They are the people who are going to be there for us when we get sick, when we lose loved ones, when really bad things happen to us. And we need those relationships throughout our lives, whether we want to accept it or not in the moment. But the second reason I really advocate for retaining those connections is political. Our most powerful influence comes not from voting, comes not from protesting, comes not from volunteering or contributing to campaigns, but from our relationships with the people closest to us in our lives. And if we separate ourselves from Republicans, we may be the last person left in their life who is actually standing up for politics as normal, who is pushing back against the dismantling of the democratic system. And one of the ways I encourage people to think about it is with reference to cults. The number one, strategy that people who help families who have lost a member to a cult, the number one strategy over and over again is maintain the lines of communication. Even if you feel like you're having no impact on that person, you need to keep the lines of communication open, because there may come a moment when they're ready to step away and they need somewhere to go. When that happens, you have to be that person for them to come back to. Otherwise, they'll decide they have nowhere else to go.
Right.
There's, like people online, like on Twitter or Blue Sky or whatever, they'll frequently say MAGA is a cult. Mm-hmm. And is it?
It definitely has a lot of characteristics that resemble a cult. I think I'm not an expert in cults. I would turn to Stephen Hassan, who is really an expert in cults. He's a psychologist who's written extensively on Trump and the administration. He definitely believes it's a cult, regardless of whether it is officially a cult or not. However, for my purposes, doesn't really matter, because the strategy is the same. Like, getting people out depends on forging strong connections with the people who are in the cult, maintaining those relationships, making it so they are not afraid of you, do not feel judged by you, and then can actually have a space to think critically about the beliefs they're hearing from the cult, from the administration, from the propaganda that is coming out of Fox News. If we don't provide that space, they don't have it.
Right. Yeah. And that tactic of separating ourselves from these people is exactly the tactic that a cult does too with their members.
Yes, that is what they want.
Yeah, exactly. And so if you can fight against that, that's great. So let's say, these people who have been resistant to doing this decide, hey, you know, I do want to give it a shot. What do you think are some of the ways that we can, if this is what we're going to do, we want to emotionally and mentally prepare ourselves before we even go into this situation where it's going to be tense and it's going to be hard? Is there any advice you can give in regards to remembering about how to approach this while still ensuring that you're engaging in an effective way, but also not keeping your guard up per se, but just protecting yourself and being mentally prepared going into a situation like that? I mean, heck, it could be a war zone for some people, depending on how, you know, extreme they really are. So I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. So I'm going to break that up into a few things. The first is how to emotionally prepare. And I think of emotional preparedness as being both kind of emotional urgent care and emotional care kind of for the long haul over the coming years, and being emotionally prepared so we can continue the fight throughout the Trump administration. So the urgent care is what a lot of us need right now, right? So I recommend taking a short break, maybe 72 hours, not just from people, but from news. Like, just shut it all down, reset your nervous system, and then re-engage very gradually, not all at once. Don't flood your nervous system. Second thing is, don't be around people who spin you up. You know, there are kind of two people out there on the left, the two classes. Like, there are the people who are in constant freak out mode, like everything is, have you heard what Trump did today, what the administration did today? And they are just teeming with anxiety, and it kind of overflows to anybody who's around them. What I encourage,
do another 4 years of that.
What I encourage instead is to be around people whose response is, well, this is a problem. We need to do something about it. Let's focus on solutions, because it's that sense of focusing on the solutions that's going to channel your energy, your emotional energy, into something that's actually productive rather than counterproductive. And then the third thing is really have ways of calming yourself down when you get triggered. You know, really simple things involve being able to name your emotions. You know, say, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm scared. When we do that, we force ourselves out of our emotional mind into our rational, logical, kind of more cognitive headspace, and that necessarily kind of calms us down. So that's the urgent care.
Sure.
Long term.
Go
ahead.
I just it seems like the way that the Republican or the MAGA, whatever you want to call it, it's hard to tell the difference anymore. Their MO is to get you into your emotions and out of your logic. And I've always thought of that in terms of, that's how they persuade people to be on their side, is by trying to scare you. And then when you're scared, you do stupid things. It's like, I was thinking of that commercial, where you know, like it's like the parody of the Mad Slashers, and they're running away from the Mad Slasher guy, and somebody's like, let's get in the running car, and she's like, no, let's go hide behind those chainsaws. You know, you act irrationally when you're scared, and it seems like MAGA tries to scare you so that you don't act rationally, to get you out of your rational mind. It never occurred to me that it has the same effect on just terrifying liberal people too. Like,
when we are scared, we cannot think rationally or act strategically, which means one of our first priorities has to be calming down and having a way to keep ourselves in a state of equilibrium. It doesn't mean that we are not concerned about what's happening. I liken it to, what it's like for a doctor when in the emergency room is that if a doctor in an emergency room were to freak out every time they were, brought a dying patient, they would not be able to help that person.
Right.
We as concerned citizens need to have the same ability to stay cool and calm and collected so we can act in response to what the incoming administration is planning to do.
Right. Yeah. So with that urgent emotional care, does that involve, and maybe this is the second part you're going to talk about, does that involve like stepping away and maybe taking a walk and getting out of that situation?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Considered part of the urgent, like I need to free myself from this position right now, get out of this heat and go, cool off, let air out and so forth.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And each person kind of has their own techniques that really work for them. And I encourage everybody to figure out what it is for you. The important thing is not to fall into the trap of avoiding, like that becomes your MO, all the time. Like, oh, I am not the kind of person who can handle politics. I'm just going to check out and leave this for other people. Or, this person is just too much. I'm not going to deal with that anymore. We can't afford that. Right? The stakes are too high. And so we need to develop the techniques necessary to actually have that engagement.
Yeah.
So for me, what I found to be, beyond the urgent care, you need a long-term strategy, something that's going to get you through the next 4 years and possibly beyond. And what I found is most effective are the same techniques that are used for treatment of PTSD. Are you familiar with exposure therapy?
Yes.
Yeah. So people who are easily triggered, when soldiers come back from war and any time they hear a loud noise, immediately are back there in a combat situation. What we do for treatment is to gradually expose them to larger and larger noises, larger and larger things that stimuli that trigger those memories. And over time, when you do that, your body naturally acclimates, your mind naturally acclimates, so those things don't trigger you anymore. That's what we need to do in the political realm. And to give you an example, in 2016 and 2017, this is exactly what I did. After the 2016 election, I had a really hard time adapting to Trump's election. And I realized I was avoiding the news. I was avoiding, I couldn't watch any of his speeches. Anytime his face showed up anywhere, I was repulsed and withdrew. And
I'm still going through that.
I was gonna say, I'm seeing those conversations on Blue Sky, and you don't see his face on there very often, but when you do, he's very upset about it.
Right.
We got out of that space.
Exactly. And so what I did was, look, as long as I'm avoiding these things and allowing myself to get triggered by them, I am not in a mental condition to actually be an effective activist. So I changed the way I was responding to that stimuli, which was when I encountered it, I would sit with it until I calmed down. Sometimes that meant if Trump came on the television, I would sit and meditate through his speech until my nervous system chilled out. If
profanities at the TV set isn't a
exactly that is the exact opposite of what we're going for here. I also use social media a lot as a way to get control of my emotions. I talk with people a lot on social media, including MAGA, people who voted for Trump and are, strong supporters. And what I did was I learned I could have productive conversations, sometimes I would read their response to something and it would trigger me. And I would sit there until I could calm down enough to write a productive response to them. And gradually over time, I got to a place where I'm really no longer flustered by this anymore. And yet I am just as concerned about it. I am just as active on these issues, but I am more effective. And that's where I think we need to be. It's like soldiers training to go to war, right? If soldiers, freak out at the first gunshot, they're not going to be effective. We need to train until we're ready to engage productively.
Along those lines, I know, thanks to Nahan's research, you talked about reflection versus rebuttal.
Yeah.
And that makes me think of like really the most effective technique we have in our marriage, my wife and I, which is that we, instead of just contradicting what the other person said, first of all, repeat what they said back to them so that they know you heard them.
Yeah.
And then, respond to what they said. And it kind of takes the hostility out of the whole thing. And because everybody feels listened to. Is that what you mean by that? Like, is that how, like, to not just fight with MAGAs, but figure out how to have a conversation with them?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I teach a 5-step process, but in many ways, the reflect step is like the critical turning point in the process, because it involves showing, as you say, that you have been listening to what they're saying, and that it gives you an opportunity to also check that you are right about what you think they're saying. So often I would say, for example, back to them, so what I'm hearing from you is that you voted for Trump because you were really concerned about inflation, and you felt that the Biden administration was the cause of all that inflation, and that Harris was a continuation of the Biden administration, and so she wasn't going to do anything about it. Is that right? And so that's an example of a reflection. Our tendency, right, would be actually most of the time to say, well, he only did that because, he had to spend in order to save the economy from the recession that was caused by the pandemic, which Trump didn't deal with adequately. And right. So we just spin out. And so the other thing I think is really important for people to understand about what you're calling rebuttal. I usually refer to that as debate. Most of us are taught like debate is the way you talk about politics, right? Civil debate. That's conversation, persuasion. So the first thing I'd like people to understand about political dialogue is debate is almost always the worst thing you can do. All right. And this is coming from someone who is like a champion high school debater. Like that was my way of communicating for years and years and years. But what I eventually realized is that debate is designed for a setting where there is an impartial judge, right? Where two sides are coming at each other, and a judge without preconceptions, with a commitment to being impartial, will make a decision entirely based on the evidence. In a debate between two people, you're basically asking the other person to be impartial in judging their argument against your argument. That does not happen. They are coming in biased. You're coming in biased. And there is no way for either of you to evaluate the other person's arguments fairly. In fact, what the research shows is that you're gonna kind of, dig in your heels, only see the evidence that supports your point, and maybe even walk away believing more strongly in your position than you did before. And so that's why we really have to move to a conversation mode. Conversations are exchanges that serve both of our purposes. And what I try to do is to, when I'm having a conversation with someone who disagrees with me, is to move the conversation from a place of you versus me to a place of us versus the problem. Right. So if we are talking about the problem of inflation in this country, then I'm going to talk about how inflation affects me and my concern about inflation and how I agree it's a really big problem. And I'm going to give them lots of room to talk about what inflation means to them and how it really is a big problem. And then instead of talking about, well, my guy's better on inflation than your guy, I'm going to say, what do you think we can do? Like, what do you think the US government can do that can really address our concerns on this issue? So looking toward the future, looking to a place without blame. And we are at that point working together to solve the problem.
Now, there's some people that I think are kind of like, while they would agree with you, there's a sort of a built up frustration. Like, why do the Democrats always have to be the adults in the room? why is it always our responsibility to make the debate civil, or to, like, the MAGA seem to be like they're always trying to make everything hostile, and then you have to calm it down. It's like when I was a little kid and I had if my little brother came and did stuff to, like, he could annoy me for half an hour. I punch him one time and it's all my fault.
Right.
I'm the older one.
Why do we have to take the high road? Yeah. I get it. I guess I have two responses to that. The first is, do you want to win? I mean, do you want
yes.
Right? Do you want to come out with a more progressive society? Because this is what it's going to take. So this is the price we pay for doing the right thing and coming out with the society we want. But it's really more than that, because let's consider, like, the argument that what the Republicans are really pushing for right now, and I think there's a lot of evidence for it, is an authoritarian or a fascist society. Yeah. The thing that most works to their advantage right now is the idea of there is an us and there is a them, and that them must be crushed, right? This kind of in-group, out-group,
real Americans,
right?
Versus,
Patriots.
Right. And so the best way to respond to that is by going right at it with, there is no us, there is no them, there is only we.
Right.
And we are concerned with all people. We are concerned with the rights and the well-being of every single human being in the country. And to the extent that we abandon that, we are playing into their hands. So resisting that, even though it's hard, it really is hard. It's emotionally demanding to be the grown-up in the room. We can't afford to do anything else.
Yeah. I think it's important too to tie back what you said about how, okay, maybe we can't say, specifically it is a cult, but again, these tactics of, how they try to argue and trigger people when they're trying to have conversations with them and scare them, that is a tactic that they have learned from being a part of the party and a part of that
Mhm.
movement. And so it makes sense that they're not coming at this with a, an adult mindset and, with a responsible attitude. So we have to remember that. And so, it is hard to remember that why do we have to be the adults all the time? But when we're reminded that this is how they were taught to act. This is
Yes.
part of this is whole part of it. It is part of what encompasses their entire belief system. So it's nice to be able to remind yourself, like, they didn't choose that. It was ingrained into them in a cult-like fashion. So that I've always used to help me remember that even though it's difficult to continue to be the bigger person, there's a good reason for that, and we need to be doing that.
Right. Yeah. Social learning is really important. We learn from the people around us and the people above us. And I would add to that is it's really important to remember why some people are Republicans and some people are Democrats in the first place. We are Democrats not because we are smarter than Republicans or more virtuous or, just all around better people.
You're popping on
The
my buttons
vast
here.
majority of us ended up progressives or Democrats because of the homes we were born into, the communities we grew up in, the life experiences we had. Political orientation is passed on the same way that religious orientation is passed on. So if you're born into a Democratic household, you are just as likely to remain a Democrat over the course of your life as someone who is born a Christian is likely to remain Christian over the course of their life. So this isn't something we pick and choose. Most people form their political orientation around the age of 7, and that's way before we can analyze the relative merits of political ideologies.
It seems to me that, like, okay, I'm Gen X. I was, grew up in the 80s. And like back in the 80s, it seemed like that's when the Republican Party really started to tie itself with two particular issues that weren't even like considered religious before that. The homosexuality and abortion, and it almost became about those two cultural issues, like became such a huge part of the Republican Party, and now it's like you see, like this, Christian nation nonsense that goes on, which is neither Christian nor American, but like is actual religion a part it seems like religion is a major part of the MAGA movement, and I'm just wondering, like, based on what you were just saying, do you have further thoughts on all that?
Well, what I'll say is I'm not an expert on this particular aspect, but I do read, so I'll tell you what I know. The first thing is religion matters for sure. But for the most part, what we're seeing recently is that religion is following political orientation rather than the other way around for the first time since we've been measuring it. Something has shifted. Like political orientation is just incredibly strong in this country right now in a way it never has been. Like it used to be, your political party was not that strong a predictor of how you voted. Now it is just the only thing that matters to predict how you vote. And so what we're actually seeing is it's kind of become the tail that wags the dog. Like not only does it determine what religion you identify with, it determines what policies you identify with. It's kind of weird that way. And so yes, religion is important, but not necessarily in the way you think. But what is really consistent with what you're saying is that the people at the higher echelons of the decision-making process within the Republican Party and within the incoming Trump administration, like the influencers, are often heavily have a particular religious bent, and so this is giving them a disproportionate amount of power.
Wouldn't you say too that just based on research I've done and statistics I've looked at, that the people in political positions tend to, especially with Trump's campaign and the people in his administration that he's picked, they tend to lean further over to the right than some of their followers even do. I think that there's a lot more that we can relate on a level with somebody that maybe we don't agree with politically all the time, much easier than we can when looking at somebody that, like I said, Trump just picked for his cabinet, because they're so extreme, but the majority of the people that follow under them are not that extreme. And there's an ability for us to be able to find a common ground when we're trying to have these conversations, over dinner, if we can figure out what that underlying issue is that we agree upon and have that we conversation. But that's what I feel like. It's the politicians are far more extreme than the everyday MAGA person.
Absolutely. I always encourage people to distinguish between the average voter and politicians. They're totally different. And you can't hold the average voter, you can't judge the average voter on the basis of what the politicians from what their party are saying or doing, because there's just a difference of night and day. First of all, if you look at public opinion surveys, right, that there's not really that much difference between what the average Democratic voter believes and what the average Republican voter believes, while there is a gigantic gap between what the average Democratic politician believes and what the average Republican politician believes, right? So if you look at it that way, that alone is massive. But part of what's going on is the average voter does not pay attention to politics. They just they tune in about 2 weeks before the election. Look at who's running from their party. They go into the polling booth, vote for the person from their party, and that's about it. Like there isn't a lot going on there, because American politics are not, well, people like us are obsessed. Like we're the weirdos, right? We think about politics all the time. Other people are worried about their job and their kids and how they're going to pay their next rent bill, right? And they're probably right for the most part in terms of like how much their behavior actually is going to impact what happens. They're like, my vote's not going to make a difference, so why, I'm going to put my energies where it matters. Right. And so when we go and have a conversation with someone, it's really important for us to keep in mind that they may have very little awareness of all the things that we are familiar with that Trump has done, or that Harris stood for, the Democratic, administration has accomplished. And that's not a strike against them. That's just the nature of the beast that we're dealing with in a democratic society. And it's important not to judge them for that.
Right. And, you had mentioned early on that it's not just the MAGAs that we need to have these conversations with, but there's a segment, the kind of burn it all down Genocide Joe, people on the left, and it's like, like for me personally, this is just my opinion. What's the Middle East is that thing has been going on for like 2,000 years. Everybody needs to stop doing what they're doing. And Joe Biden, like on October 7th, 2019, was put in an impossible situation to where if he supports Israel at all, he's going to lose the Arab vote. And if he supports Gaza at all, he loses the Jewish vote. So like in a lot of ways, I feel like we lost the election on October 7th, 2019. And from that point forward, it was impossible to do the right thing. And I think that, there is truth to the fact that we are giving money to Israel, are giving weapons to Israel, has enabled Israel to kill a lot of Gazan citizens that didn't deserve to die. At the same time, Donald Trump's son-in-law is talking about beachfront property in Gaza. Yeah. So like it can be a whole hell of a lot worse. And they're not like considering that, and they're just saying it's all the same, and and it's a nuanced conversation, and it's just like I won't say it's as bad as MAGA, because MAGA is just so steeped in ignorance, and they actually do have like actual facts that they're talking about, and they actually understand things, but there's a sort of naivety to and kind of overlooking, okay, well, you've still got Donald Trump is going to have a majority Supreme Court all by himself for the next generation. Like that scares the hell out of me. And and not just that, all the other judges that are, like more than half the judges in the country are going to be named by him. That's terrifying. And so I feel like we need to learn to talk to some people on the left to where they're not so caustic. But it's a different kind of conversation with the people we have on the right, because they actually are not stupid. And shouldn't say, when I say stupid, I mean like kind of willfully stupid, where there's like, I don't want facts are bothersome. Like they're not like that, but there's a different kind of conversation to be had there. Do you have any feedback on that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you that a big part of the solution for this is introducing nuance into the conversation. And that is one of the most important things we can do in any conversation, whether it is with people on the left or the right, but to realize that there is a spectrum of possibilities. It isn't either, block all immigrants and deport all the ones that are here, or open the borders and let everybody into the country, right? Mm-hmm. There is a wide range of possibilities here. And so whether we are talking with Republicans or Democrats, like that is something we need to do, in part because when you introduce nuance, you calm people down. It is one of the things is black and white thinking allows you to have a sense of certainty and clarity that revs up emotions and facilitates anger and all of the things that make compromise and rational policy making impossible. So we need to introduce that. The other way to come at it is with some compassion, right? So the people you're talking about on the left are usually people I think of as idealists who have become really cynical because of what they see as the failure of contemporary politics. They're wounded, they're injured, and they become kind of hopeless. And so rather than talking with them about the specific issue, like specifically about the Middle East, I would tend to talk with them more, or use that as like a launching board for having a conversation about like what they feel is possible politically, and how disempowered they feel, and how, you know, depressed they are that our country is where it is, and that the world is where it is. Usually once you start having that conversation, it's going to bring them down. They're going to open up, and they're going to get to a more rational place. They're going to be more able to think about the nuance. But you have to take the time, right? If you come at them with, well, that's not rational. You know, Trump is going to be even worse for Gaza than Harris, right? That's not going to get you anywhere.
Right.
That's very insightful.
Yeah. I have a feeling. So I know earlier you'd mentioned, because I got an opportunity to glance at some things yesterday on the Smart Politics site, that you have kind of like a structured best practices on starting a conversation. And if you're capable of getting it to the, you know, inspire them to change their minds, or, you know, getting them to, you know, look at things in a different light. What are those steps that you would suggest taking going into it from the start?
Right. So we really have two separate systems that work in concert, which I know is kind of complicated, but one is like we call the trust pyramid. And you need to have people's trust in order to be persuasive. So basically, as you're going through a conversation, you are earning their trust. And the very first type of trust you need to earn is comfort. They need to feel safe. Like you're not going to attack them or judge them or try to control them. After that, you really need to have an emotional connection with them, right? You need to establish some kind of affinity. Like, oh, we have things in common. You know, we like a lot of the same things. We may have some differences about politics, but you and I live in the same state and love the same type of dog. You know, whatever.
Right.
Then comes comprehension, which is you have to listen to this person long enough to get to a place where you could probably effectively make their case for them.
Right.
You could say, oh, so this person believes this and this and this and this, and this is why. And that's really going to make them trust you even more. They're going to be like, oh, this person gets me. They may not agree with me, but they get me.
Yeah.
The next is compassion. Compassion really deals with this person isn't just out for themselves. They actually care about me as a human being. And finally, we get to credibility, which is where most of us go, like from the beginning. Like we're like, you should listen to me because I'm an expert on this, or I have great facts, or I've been studying this for 20 years. But that's actually not where credibility comes from. Credibility comes from being willing to admit when you're wrong. Credibility comes from being willing to admit when you don't know the answer, things like that. So if you want someone to listen to you, that's the pyramid you have to climb. The way we recommend doing that is with what we call the change conversation cycle. And it will kind of, as you're going through it, you will build trust naturally. And it involves, if you are initiating a conversation, begin with a question. And the questions should be like open-ended, non-judgmental, curious, you know, like, what do you think about, you know, all of these appointments from the Trump administration? Or what do you think we should do about the immigration crisis in this country? And so it doesn't, it invites them to really share what their point of view is.
Seems like even to broach that conversation, you need to be in the right headspace so that the first time they respond, you're not like, you know.
Well, that's why we talked earlier about what are we
Oh.
going to do to mentally prepare before we even get to this point.
Right.
Yeah.
You do have to be prepared to hear answers to that question you don't like.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, they ask the question and are shocked by the answer and like hightail it down. The first few times they do it, because it you know, particularly if you're only used to talking with people on the left, hearing what Republicans really have to say on these subjects, particularly if they watch Fox News a lot, you'll get like just a stream of consciousness Fox News talking points that can go on for 15 minutes. But you got to take them through it. They need to get that off their chest before you can move them to the next place. So the hard part next is you need to listen to what they say. You can't just tune out. You can't just sit there thinking about why everything they say is wrong. You need to genuinely listen to the answer, partly with, trying to really understand where they're coming from. You're not going to agree with them, but you're going to get to a place where, okay, there is a little bit of coherence here in their belief system, and you're going to find it. The next thing, as we talked about before, is to reflect back what they've told you. You don't have to summarize everything. Usually what I do is pick the most important thing that they said, or the theme that keeps reemerging, whatever seems most important to them. And then I say, okay, so what I'm hearing from you is this. And usually what you get then is they just light up. They are just so happy and excited to have someone actually hear them. You earn a lot of goodwill that way. I know a lot of people stumble there because they feel like, well, when I do that, they think I'm agreeing with them. And no, you're not agreeing with them. All you're doing is repeating back what they said. Right. There's a distinction there. And you are earning a lot of goodwill that it will serve you well as you move through the conversation. The next step is to validate their response, right? So find something in what they said that you can agree with, or acknowledge at least that you can imagine how someone could feel that way. And sometimes it just means if they're talking about fears, you can say, oh, I'm really, really sorry that you feel that way. That must be hard. Even if you think their fears are irrational, right? So find something that acknowledges what they've said and can put a positive spin on it. It really builds out common ground, which is important. And then finally, the last step is you can offer something of your own, share. But what is important here is not to rush in here with debate, right? That is our go-to. Like, after wading through all of this, we're often tempted to now jump in with all the reasons why they're wrong. And if you do that, you're going to undo all the hard work you did getting to this point. Instead, what we find is most effective is to either tell a personal story that kind of undermines their thesis, right? So let's say I'm having a conversation with someone about global warming, and they're like, well, there haven't been any effects. Maybe I tell a personal story about how my insurance premiums have gone up on my house so much that I can't, I'm worried I'm not even going to be able to insure my house in California anymore when my current insurance expires. Something really relatable and something they're going to be able to talk about. And then I say, we continue around the cycle. So what about you? Have you had any experiences like that? And that's how change happens, like through the relationship, not through facts.
So the Equilibrium Television here, he asks, Trump does not display any of these qualities. I think we can all agree on that. Neither does his circle. Again, amen. What resulted in people being drawn to that? Like, why does that appeal to some people? Maybe it was being judged on a person-to-person basis or feeling threatened.
Yeah.
How do you respond to that?
So I think the simple answer to why Trump has as much support as he does is not a satisfying one, but I think it's true, which is Trump won at least the first time around because he was a Republican. Mm-hmm. And I believe he won the second time around because people were dissatisfied with the Biden administration. Full stop. Now, I think the question this person is really getting at is, how did Trump get the nomination of the Republican Party? Because it's likely the results would have been exactly the same no matter who had been at the top of the ticket, the Republican ticket. And so that question really comes down to, he's a populist. Mm-hmm. And when the public is highly disaffected, they are drawn to, and when they feel helpless in the face of government, like that is not meeting their needs, and they think the government can't meet their needs, they tend to gravitate toward authoritarian figures, populists who promise to fix things, even though they have no practical way of doing so through the existing government. And often historically, those figures are really crass and horrible people. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you can make a strong case that Donald Trump is a psychopath. But that's for a lot of people right now. It doesn't matter to them who he is if he fixes what's broken. Right. And they're convinced that the Democrats can't fix it. And so they're willing to give it a shot.
Yeah. When I was in college, I did a report on the commonalities between Mao, Stalin, and Hitler. And the thing that really struck out to me was that all three of them were very crass and coarse in their language. And they like to, and that appealed to people. That is like that was where their popularity came from. Because he's saying these words and, talking like one of us, he must be one of us. Even though like Trump's definitely not one of us. He tries to come across like an ordinary man, but he has never, ever in his entire life not had enough money to pay for something.
Right.
And that's something every ordinary person has had. So, but he's managed to convince us that's who he is.
Yeah. It's fascinating. The political science part of me and the social psychologist part of me is constantly just, I get a certain distance on it and just marvel at what's happening from a scientific perspective. But yeah, as a citizen, I'm terrified.
Yeah, it's difficult for me to wrap my head around that idea too, where he's like the everyday man, but he is nothing like the everyday man. I don't understand, and because I don't study it quite like that on a scientific level. I don't understand how it is that he sold himself to these people to agree with him on that, because to me it just seems so obvious that it's not the case. So that just it's mind-boggling to me that people feel like they can relate to him in that way.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist.
So now, Dory, I'm just going through some of these questions. Dory says the MAGA in my life get their disinformation from podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
And then she adds Alex Jones, Louder with Crowder, etc. And I think this is another real thing. Like my wife had like this 1.5 year long text debate with my MAGA brother-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
And
debate.
Yeah. Discussion, debate. My wife is patient enough that she's been married to me for 25 years. So, and he kept saying, Joe Biden is never going to get inaugurated. The Lord told me this, and blah blah blah.
Mm.
And I was like telling her, okay, make him like commit to that. Like if he does get inaugurated, you have to admit you were wrong. You can't just move the conversation onto something else. You have to say, okay, he legitimately won. The Lord, you said the Lord would stop it. The Lord didn't stop it. So therefore, the Lord is, giving his approval to it. And so you have to admit God is right and you're wrong if he gets inaugurated. And she never did that. And I really wish she had. But how do you address, it's one thing to just address ignorance. It's another thing to address disinformation, because they have, they are informed with wrong stuff.
Right.
And so they're like, oh yeah, I'm ready to have a debate. And then vaccines don't work, masks don't work, Russia was a hoax, and all of this stuff. And they're fully armed and equipped with a bunch of nonsense. That's not true.
Right. So this brings us back to, debate doesn't work. Right. They are coming in with a bias. They are armed with facts that we don't accept as true, because they're not, but they accept them as true. So we are not going to win this conversation on the debate playground or field. That is not, we will not make progress if we do that. It is a guaranteed stalemate from the get-go. So, I strongly advise don't go there. What do you do instead? You persuade through trust. You persuade through your relationship. You become one of the people in their lives who they trust for reliable information, who they trust for thinking logically about and in an unbiased fashion about the political world, right? And so that becomes the focus of your conversations, not so much talking about who's right, who's wrong, what's true, what's false, but more about what's important. Like, what are our values? How do we decide, who we can trust and who we can't trust? A great conversation isn't about, well, look, Alex Jones has been proven in court to be an untrustworthy person. You shouldn't listen to this. This is brainwashing. He's conning you and capitalizing on your stupidity. A great conversation is, there are a lot of people out there in the world who, some are putting out really good information now. Some are putting out really bad information right now. And it can be hard to tell the difference. How do you decide which people you can trust? Right. And so you have that conversation. And then after they start to share what they think, then you tell your story. Here's how I decide how, who to trust. I'm not always right. Tell a story about a time you were wrong. But a lot of times I feel like I get really good information. And so it's through this kind of back and forth that you really develop a relationship where you can be influential. So the next time they come to you with something you can, from Alex Jones, you can say, not sure about that. What do you say we take some time together to look into whether this is true or not? And go from there. That can be really powerful. But you need to have that foundation of that relationship and a commitment to being there over the long haul.
Yeah. I love that approach. I think that's great. Oh, Dora, I see your message from Dora. I actually wanted to tie something in with something that Rita said here, because I think one question that I wanted to ask, and somebody actually brought it up to me, and I was like, hey, that's a great question. She says, throughout 2016, I tried to have conversations with MAGA folk, trying to hold on to friendships. I shared personal experiences that were at best dismissed, at worst weaponized against me. And so I feel like we have to really have the honest conversation about that. What happens when there is a moment where we need to take more than 72 hours and take a break from these, relationships or these conversations, when they're actually trying to harm us emotionally, mentally, in a way that is, going to cause us pain, and it's not productive anymore. At what point do we decide, okay, this is no longer productive for me? This is making things worse. And, how do you recognize when it's time to step back from that?
Right. So a couple of things I really emphasize with regard to this. One is the importance of setting boundaries, right? So there are okay ways to behave in a political conversation and not okay ways to behave in a political conversation. And most of the time you have to be the one to make those lines explicit. Because what I find is, in our current political culture, particularly with social media, the way it is, especially X, people have learned a lot of bad habits about, engaging in conversation. And so you have to remind them what's the proper way to behave. And often for me, I call it going into my mom mode. I'm just like, wait, stop. This is not okay. I would love to talk about this with you. But you cannot call me names while we do it. And I promise I won't call you names either. Do you want to continue this conversation? Great. I want to continue it too. Do you promise you won't call me names anymore? Okay, let's go. So things like that. If you find most people are very happy to oblige when they know that you're willing to listen to them. Like, I very rarely have people say no, right? Because then they lose the connection. And the reality is they want to talk to you. And I do this in person and I do it on social media, and it works. The other thing that happens is sometimes after making that commitment, they still slip up, right? We're going along and then they forget and say, oh, that's stupid. And I remind them, remember what we agreed to. And usually they say, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot, right? And then we go back to doing it. Now, if it continues to be a problem, even after that, and it becomes clear that they're not trying, they are just trolling, for the psychological thrill it gives them, then at that point, I leave the conversation. And I usually think of it like more of a timeout. I'm like, you know what? It's clear you are not in a place to have this conversation right now. Again, I would love to talk about it sometime when you really are serious about having a conversation, but not now.
Yeah.
So I always leave the door open a little bit. The one place where I totally cut people off, and this is exceedingly rare, is when people are outright abusive, right? Where their motive is entirely to inflict harm.
Right.
So if people are using racial epithets, gender epithets, sexual epithets, it becomes clear pretty fast that they're not interested in any kind of serious engagement. And sometimes with family members, what you end up with is something that is tied to historically abusive behavior. And in that case, you may have to cut it off too.
Mm-hmm.
But that again is kind of a special case. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. It does. Yeah, I think that, I guess I'm thinking also more along the lines of, so a lot of times these conversations are either like happening over text message or a phone call or on social media. And it's easy to say, okay, I'm going to step away from this situation right now because it's getting to be too heated. I'm not capable of continuing this conversation on with them. But with the holidays coming up, we're actually going to be in person with these people.
Right.
We're going to be in the same room with them. Heck, we might have even taken a ride with them to the party or the dinner, the event that we're going to. So I guess, I would follow up on that question with is there anything different that you would do in those situations where you're actually physically there with these people?
Yeah.
Anybody having any altercations, those sorts of things I worry about.
Yeah. Be careful about the alcohol consumption. Yeah. Right? But I recommend that people take some time before you go to the event to remind yourself what you like about this person or even love about this person before, without regard to their politics. What memories can you draw upon from the past when you were a kid where this person, showed you real care, and get in touch with that, because that's going to keep you grounded in those moments where they say things that really trigger you. Give yourself credit just for showing up. Just being there and maintaining that connection and holding, preserving relationships in the face of a political divide that is, the largest that we've had in this country since the Civil War. That means something. That is a blow against fascism. That is, we will not be divided by hate. And that's really important.
So,
go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to related to all of this and getting back to Dory, and it's actually, it all flows fine. My son and I do not discuss politics because of this, getting back to the Alex Jones things. He's a conspiracy theory mom failure. And the thing I was wondering if you could address, should we feel like personal responsibility is, especially like for, like parents or, like, and their children, like, did Dory, like, should Dory feel she did like, I don't think she should feel like she's a failure because of what her son believes. And I can see that, being a thing that you assign yourself guilt for what they believe.
Yeah.
What do you tell Dory?
No, that doesn't make her a mom failure. No, we tend to both overestimate and underestimate the amount of power we have over others, and that includes our children. Once our children leave our home, they make their own choices and are surrounded by their own, like, a a new environment of our choosing, and we cannot control that. And it is environment more than anything that influences what people believe, and how they behave. So what you can do at this point is be a part of that environment, right? If we think of an environment as being 100% of what surrounds a person, maybe, Dory, you can only be 10% now, right? And he's got 90% MAGA. Mm-hmm. But if you eliminate yourself from that, it's 100% MAGA. And so that's why you need to stay in there, even though it's hard. What I strongly recommend that people do who are in your situation, and believe me, there are lots and lots of you, is to find a support group of other people who are going through what you are going through, so that you can talk about it, talk about the experience of having a child who has beliefs that are so disturbing to you. Share techniques that you have come up with for talking with your children and other family members. We at Smart Politics have a Sunday group, which is a combination support group and skills group that people come to all the time to talk about their situation with children and spouses and parents, and it can be really helpful.
Okay, now we've got Blind Hog searching for action. So the right takes a truth and misplaces the blame before the inevitable buildup of rage needs venting. The nation cries out for accountability, and Trump promises retribution, which is close enough for some. So I'm thinking of things like Trump saying, I'm not being prosecuted because of my crimes. I'm being prosecuted for you. And then people are all mad that he's being prosecuted when it's actually for his crimes. It's not like,
right.
But he builds up this rage in people, and then they're, like they feel this justified rage.
Well, yeah. And also there's just a lot of kind of free floating grievance in this country. Mm-hmm. Yeah. A lot of people who feel, and many rightly so, that they should be doing better financially, in terms of their health, like that something is broken in the country that is getting in the way of them getting ahead, even though they're working really hard and following the rules and doing all the right things. And Trump has become the embodiment of that grievance. When we on the left attack Trump because they see themselves, they identify themselves with Trump, they feel personally attacked. Mm-hmm. And that is one of the systems Trump has put in place for strengthening his appeal to voters.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of this, like you said, I think when Trump is saying he's being attacked by everybody, he's their retribution, he is their savior. For some people that sounds great because they feel like they've been left at the wayside. Yeah. And so even though it's to our ears, it sounds very conspiratorial. It sounds very fascist. It sounds terrifying, to be quite frank, but it might be comforting for some people because they have felt like they've been forgotten and left behind. So, that's why they're able to listen to Alex Jones and not hear that as being something that sounds absolutely insane, but something that sounds comforting to them, I feel.
Yeah, it's reassuring. For many people, he is like a comforting father figure who has swooped in to take care of everything.
Yeah. Or who was it that said, Daddy's coming home? Goodness, that was so terrible. They were at
who was it?
Daddy's coming home and you're getting a spanking or something.
Yeah.
Oh, Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, it was
Tucker Carlson.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, I get that. I think it is.
Tucker Carlson never met a fascist authoritarian that he didn't like.
It does seem that way.
I want to ask a question to piggyback off something that you were saying earlier about how you use this time. You know, if you're watching Trump on television, you used to sit and meditate sometimes during that while he was talking, or you'll use social media as a source to, you know, kind of practice conversations with people, with the MAGA types.
Right.
My question is less about the act of doing that, but more of there's been a conversation about, and since there's been the exodus and everybody coming over to Blue Sky over from Twitter, where they are, you know, we all say that Twitter's a cesspool, you know, it's all MAGA bots and you know, fascists and Russian agents and assets. And we're looking to not have those people be part of our experience on Blue Sky as a social media platform. So there's block lists, you know, people do not engage, report, block. You know, what do you say to that? Because some people there's a differencing opinions on that, and saying, well, you know, if they're not here, it's an echo chamber, and you know, we're not going to ever be able to get to those people and have those meaningful conversations where we might be able to persuade somebody to change their mind. However, you know, or you know, why are you leaving Twitter when these are where those conversations are happening? Where like I have my own personal opinion on it and what I've made decisions for my sanity and my personal life and my personal interactions on social media. But I'm curious to know what your opinion is on that, because it sounds like you still are, you know, having those conversations on Twitter and also, you know, with MAGA and people on the more progressive side.
If I could just say something about that really quick, I really wish the people that would say, oh, how are you going to have the conversations with these people? How many conversations have they had tried to have with us before they came out with that condemnation? Like, you know, Nate Silver and all of these, you know, well, okay, you think you need to have honest conversations. Where's your honest conversation with the people that have left for Blue Sky before you just made a snap judgment about everybody that left that toxic situation and just wanted to, you know, like, I feel like there's a big difference between wanting to have an honest conversation without being drowned out by trolls and bots and like foreign adversaries that are deliberately trying to make the hostile and the owner of the site trying to make things hostile. Like, I want to have a conversation outside of all of that hostility. That's why I left, is so I could have a conversation. You're telling me the only way I can have that conversation is to be in this combative environment where, you know, even like based on what you're saying, is almost impossible.
Yeah. It's like you're exposing yourself to it being in an abusive situation. That's how I personally felt like, you know, that they're being disingenuous when they're saying, oh, well, if you're leaving, then we're never going to be able to have honest conversations. It's like, I don't think there was ever a time, maybe one or two instances that I had a genuine conversation with somebody on Twitter about an issue. Because the majority of the time it's name calling, you know, people trying to dox you, all these different things where it's like, this is not productive. This is not productive talk. And they're being dishonest about what their intent is. And so that's what I think about it. So I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. So I just recently switched to Blue Sky. I have not officially left Twitter yet because I'm not quite sure how, but for precisely the reasons you're talking about. Like I used to have great conversations on Twitter when it was Twitter. I had a few once it switched to X. And in the last 6 months or so, it's become impossible, right? As soon as Musk came out in support of Trump, it was clear the algorithm changed, and I just can't see anybody I want to see or engage with anyone who is open to real conversation. It's just spewing abuse over and over again. My hope is, in coming to Blue Sky, that I will actually be able to start having conversations again with people. And I use the decision tree that I gave you before, which is if they are open to conversation, I will talk with them. I will talk with them about anything, but they have to treat me well. They have to treat other people well, and they can't be behaving in an abusive manner. Until recently, I was doing the same thing still on Facebook. Facebook has been a good outlet for me, but I was strangely banned from Facebook.
Oh, goodness.
And I haven't been able to get back on for 4 months.
Wow.
So, yeah, that's been a real problem.
It happened to me actually in 2020 during COVID. I was in Germany for the summer visiting my husband. And I got banned because I called somebody out for being saying a racist comment, and my comment on that they got my account banned. And I was like, I didn't even say, I wasn't even name called. The way that those, nobody's actually looking at that. It's all bot and algorithm related. If you get banned or
well, the weird thing was they
banning
banned me for an Instagram account that I don't have. So there's been no way to appeal.
Yeah.
Because they told me to appeal through the Instagram account. That is not mine. Anyway, so I'm suing them.
There you go. Sounds like that's next step there.
So normally we try, and at least because we realize that our guests have lives outside of this.
Really? Yeah.
So we normally try and keep it to an hour. We're at an hour and a half. If you want to keep going, that's fine. If you have other things to do and other places to be, just let us know, and we can. So how are things looking? Would you like to continue, or do you need to go?
I'm happy to continue. I don't have anything pending immediately.
Okay, just let us know if you get bored or.
I could talk about this all day. This is what I love.
So, do you have any other? Do you have some follow-ups there, Nahan?
Yeah, so I do. One thing I don't think that we did get to touch on at the beginning, because I think we jumped just right into talking about the topic overall. I wanted to just know how you were able to. This is more about your background. I looked at your educational history and all those things, but I'm just curious to know. When did you decide to merge your political work with your professional background as a therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist? I think it's extremely interesting that you took that route, and I would love to hear more about what made you decide to take that journey.
Yeah, it was not planned. It was. It actually was a response to the 2016 election.
Oh, wow.
When I realized, I have two sets of skills that are both relevant. I wasn't convinced that the convention, like the way most people on the left were responding to the Trump administration, concerned me. I didn't think it was actually going to be very effective. And I think it didn't get at the root of the problem. And I thought that the move toward dividing our country further, cutting off the Trump voters in our lives rather than talking with them was going to contribute to Trump's increased control over them. So that's when I really started teaching these skills. It partly grew out of after the election. I had I realized I didn't have a good understanding of why so many people were voting for Trump, and it was partly because I'd never spoken with a Trump voter. So my solution was to get on social media and talk with a family member of mine, an uncle who I knew was very pro-Trump. And I was like, I need to, maybe he can explain to me why he voted for him. So we started talking on social media. And over the course of that dialogue, I began to realize a couple things. One was we could actually have this conversation if I approached him with the same skills I used in therapy,
right,
which is like a very wide open format where he could talk about whatever he wanted, and I was non-judgmental and supportive, and all of those kinds of things. Like then I could get to a place where I really understood him. But the second thing that emerged from that was, like in therapy, when you give someone that kind of space, they start to change.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw him beginning to entertain more criticism of Trump and think more critically about things he was before automatically posting. Like, he was posting a lot of racist stuff and not realizing, I think, that that's what it was. But I got to a place where I was able to gently push back and say, hey, this kind of concerns me, because of this. And he would say, oh, really? And then we could talk
about that,
rather than him becoming like defensive and getting into a fight about it. And he would take it down. And so it was when that started to happen that I realized, oh, this really works. And I founded Smart Politics on Facebook, and it quickly grew to 10,000 members. And we started teaching.
It's awesome. So maybe it's I don't think it's too personal to share. Would you consider that, or what was the end result of that, method that you used with your uncle? Did he really, I mean, is there a success story to share with that? Other than just like, hey, it's
sadly, my uncle died
right
after Trump was sworn in. So I will never know how that would have turned out. But I'd seen, the situation was that I'd seen enough. It was clear to me what the trajectory was. And so I've been talking with people ever since.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see how this is not going to be an effective way to approach people, especially when you're coming at them with the sense of compassion. And I love the truth tree that you have, because as you said earlier, coming with the credibility part and trying to be, succinctly factual, you're missing the mark entirely and not giving yourself the opportunity to, grow from the bottom up a relationship with somebody, even if it's just part of one conversation you're sitting there having with them. Because at the end of the day, you can tell somebody a story about yourself and it be just your story, no facts, data or statistics involved in that. And you're more likely to persuade somebody to, kind of take what you have to say and consider that, than you are if you're going to be trying to be, because the Democrats have this problem a lot of times where they think, they talk like they're too intellectual and they treat, the people on the right as if they're stupid, when really it's just that you're not making that connection with them. And that's, I think it goes for both sides. Democrats also look for, I know Democrats who could care less about statistics and facts and the real nitty gritty numbers. But if you come with them with a story of your experiences, they're much more likely to listen to you. And I think that's part of one of the really important parts of, the methods that you work with and suggest, and for people coming, with the holiday coming up and how they should be approaching these things. I did want to ask you another question about the holiday part. So let's say, they are able to go through these conversations. Maybe they don't get to the end of that cycle, but they're able to, keep things civil and have a decent conversation. And they go home. And then what would you say? Is there any post prep or post production of that conversation, shutting that down and reflective, a retrospective that maybe they should think about considering when they are back at home and maybe reviewing like the conversation went, are there, maybe they want to revisit that again. What would be, next best steps for that to ensure that, they're doing the right thing and they keep staying on track towards, having those good conversations with those family members.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important to reflect back on the conversation you had and think about what went right, what you could do better next time. One of the things I find mistakes people make is that they actually tend to be too hard on themselves. Mm-hmm. They set too high a bar and they're like, it didn't persuade them. I walked away from that conversation and they were still just as racist and pro-Trump as they were before, right? And that's not really the way to think about it. You're not going to change a lifetime of socialization in a single conversation, a single dinner. It doesn't happen that way.
What?
Right? Right. Okay. So what makes, when can you give yourself a gold star? You can give yourself a gold star when you showed up, right? If you didn't attack them, you didn't call them names, you didn't destroy the dinner with your emotional outburst. Those are really good. When you are true to yourself, in that, let's say for an example, someone is going off and calling Democrats horrible people. Democrats are destroying the country. What I would probably do then is just be like, hey, Democrat here. Do you think I'm a horrible person? Right. I don't think I'm a horrible person. And that usually stops them dead in their tracks. It kind of pops that stereotype. They have Democrats in their mind as this monster, these horrible people, and then you just bring them back to actually Democrats are real people you know and care about. Right. Stuff like that. And then my friend David Campt, his statement is you have had a successful conversation if, one, you've been authentic to yourself, you've said at least one authentic thing, and two, the other person is willing to talk with you again, right? So you haven't severed the cord by being so obnoxious.
How do you deal with cognitive dissonance? Like people that are anti-vax and pro-Trump, and you point out Trump is vaccinated, warp speed is actually maybe one of the few things he did that was positive, but that's, there's confusion over what on how much it was tested, right, or whether it was experimental and all that stuff. But all of that was because of warp speed, and I'm glad he did it because it saved lives. Mm-hmm. But to them, they're like, there's no contradiction between being anti-vax and pro-Trump, and that's just the most glaring and obvious example.
Right.
How do you when the cognitive dissonance is going on, do you point it out to them? Do you just hope that someday they will realize it themselves? What do you do with that?
Okay, so first, I just want to clarify terms because this is something I hear a lot. So what you're actually talking about is cognitive inconsistency, right? So there are two beliefs that are opposed. And cognitive dissonance is the negative or aversive feeling that should come from having two inconsistent beliefs. So what you're really referring to is the fact that they seem to lack cognitive dissonance in response to obvious cognitive inconsistency. So what
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, sure. So what I normally do with that is once I've gotten to that place in a conversation where I've really climbed the trust pyramid, and I feel like we have a pretty solid relationship, then I maybe can start exploring gently things like cognitive inconsistency. So let's say we're having a conversation about, how they don't like vaccines and they won't get their children vaccinated and they won't get the COVID vaccine, whatever. And I've really heard them out. I've reflected back all the things they've said. And maybe I got to a good share place. And what I say is, one of the things that I find a little perplexing is how a lot of people who don't like vaccines also, are huge fans of Donald Trump. But Donald Trump got vaccinated. He took the COVID vaccine and oversaw the program to distribute COVID vaccines around the country. Like, how do you like Trump, right? So how do you reconcile that? Right? So those two things are suddenly presented to them in the same place, but in a very non-judgmental, curious way. Now, chances are they're going to shrug it off and be, find a way to explain it away or dismiss it. But sometimes hearing that and seeing that inconsistency might actually cause them to pause and think about it. And that may lead to some kind of growth. It may destabilize their belief system in some way. But it's never going to do what Democrats hope it'll do, which will be this moment of epiphany. Right? Oh my God, obviously this is I've had it wrong all along, or that's not going to happen. And it certainly doesn't help to be like, you're a hypocrite, which tends to be our go-to in these moments.
Yeah. You don't ever see that backfire, do you? Where, that makes them, maybe they agree with you on that, but then they're like, oh, well, then now I support Trump even more. I wonder if that ever happens, where it's like you're presenting them with the actual idea that maybe one part is wrong, but then when they realize that they were incorrect about the vaccine issue, it makes them feel like, oh, well, then I'm more supportive of that person because they did the thing, because now they're agreeing with that new concept or idea.
It's more likely that what they will do is find some way to minimize it. Mm-hmm. So what they'll probably say is, well, I don't agree with everything Trump does.
Yes. Oh,
right. So that'll be it. Or Trump does lots of things I disagree with.
Yeah.
So like if they say that, like when they say stuff like that, like I like to ask them, can you name some?
Yeah.
And
they never do.
You actually you can get them to do that. The trick is you've got to have that relationship established first. Right? It can't feel like a trap. That's really important. One of my favorite go-tos is to ask people, like, okay, how strong is your support for Trump on a scale from like 1 to 10? Like 10 being like he's the greatest president we've ever had of all time, whatever, and 1 is like I hate him, right? And a lot of times what you'll get is like an 8 or a 9. And what I like to do then is then say, Well, why not a 10? And if you've made them feel safe enough and invested enough in the conversation, they'll go there.
Mhm.
Like they'll make the case against Trump for you. Another way to do it is to say, well, I'm not as much of a fan of Trump as you are, obviously. But if you had to guess, what do you think are some of the things I don't like about Trump?
Mm.
And you could even do a thing where, well, my guess is these are the things you like about Trump. So make the case for them so they don't feel like they have to, and then have them do the same for you.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of perspective taking can kind of be helpful in shaking things loose a little bit.
Yeah, I like that technique. It's a good way to go about it.
I like that. Yeah.
Have to try it out.
But yeah, everything depends on that relationship and safety, right?
Yeah.
As soon as people start to feel like you are going to hurt them in some way or threaten them or try to control them, then it's all gonna fall apart.
Yeah. Do you ever find that you're talking with people on the right and they're using these same methods and practices? Do you ever experience that you're getting that from the right? I mean, I consider what you're doing with smart politics as being a bipartisan solution to having conversations with people. But I wonder if, in your experience in doing this type of work, have you actually come across, a Republican that you've had conversations with that's putting this into practice on their own while they're having this talk with you? I'm just curious to know if it's like coming out naturally all from that side at any point in time.
There are people who are more traditional conservatives who are involved in the bridge building movement. So, groups like Living Room Conversations and Listen First and others. I'm sorry, I'm blanking right now, but where they practice a lot of these good listening skills. And so they're pretty good at listening. They are not as interested. Like these groups basically have sworn off persuasion. So their goal is simply to get people to come together and listen to each other. So I don't really encounter many of the persuasion techniques, but the listening techniques for sure.
That's more. You say
I joked with my wife one time. She asked me, "What would you do if you met a Republican who knew as much about politics as you do?" And I told her that's not fair. And she says, "Why not?" And I said, "Well, if they knew as much about politics as me, they wouldn't be a Republican."
Good one.
So I think, all right, so we're coming up on 2 hours.
Yeah.
We always like, at the end of the show, I always like to give the guest a chance to pitch whatever they want to pitch. I know that you've spoken about smart politics a few times. If you wanted to elaborate a little more on that, and then maybe you have a book coming out.
Hopefully, it's been delayed. So, but yeah, just watch for a book at this point. But yeah, the best thing to do is to connect with Smart Politics. We are at joinsmart.org and get on our mailing list. That way you're going to
joinsmart.org.
Yes.
Okay, I'm just entering that into the chat here.
And once you do that, you can find out about all of our offerings. Like I said, we have a Sunday night group where we get together, and it functions as both a support group and skills practice group. so you can learn how to have these conversations and also get the emotional support you need to actually engage people. I have taught lots of webinars in the past that are available in various forms online. If you go to the website, you'll find the links. I've written lots of articles, which are also at the website. And then the thing that I'm probably most proud of is my chatbot, AI chatbot powered by ChatGPT. And if you have ChatGPT Plus, you can use it like pretty much endlessly. If you don't, there's like a free kind of trial period where you get like, I don't know, 10 exchanges per day or something. It's called the Angry Uncle Bot. And I can give you.
How do they get to the Angry?
I put it in the chat there, Kelly, on YouTube, but it's not showing over here on.
Are you on? Where are you at?
I'm on YouTube in the chat here.
Oh, I see.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, because I know what's going on. There's like the live chat versus.
Ah, okay. Yeah,
So
I've got the link. Yeah, I've got the link.
If you want to come back if you want to post it in, like if you go in the studio,
the private chat,
go up to the top where it says comments,
and
then if you want to enter it there.
Okay.
It'll post in the live chat. But I'm glad you posted it in the other chat too for when this isn't, because it should be in both.
Yeah, it's weird. It doesn't show me like a box. I'm going to put it in the private chat so you can put it in there because it doesn't show me like a comment box for myself. So we'll get it out there though.
Oh.
Great. Yeah, the chatbot is fun because it lets you practice at varying levels of difficulty. You can, just talk to Angry Uncle or, all the way up to like apoplectic.
Oh, wow.
Angry Uncle. So he's fun. So it really gives you an opportunity.
Is there a drunk uncle option?
I haven't thought of that. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Drunk uncle would be extra fun. I bet I could make it do that too. I could do it just for Thanksgiving.
There you go.
But it lets you talk about any topic you want to discuss. As you have the exchange, there's a little avatar for me that provides feedback about how your responses are and how you can improve them going forward. So it's really good for learning the technique, but also for desensitizing yourself so that you don't immediately get triggered. I've had a lot of people like start having a conversation with the bot and actually get angry, right? So if you keep doing it, you can get to the place where you don't get angry.
So nobody has to like tip over the Thanksgiving dinner table.
Yeah.
Hopefully not.
Yeah, good test run for beforehand so you can, have some sort of expectation of what it's going to be like and be prepared. I think that's a great like pre-Thanksgiving part of my checklist. If I'm going to go to a dinner where that's going to happen, I would definitely use it. I haven't got to use it yet. I had it pulled up this morning, so I'm going to use it and
cool.
Prep.
And feel free to adopt a gloat gravy uncle if you want to too.
Yeah, I might.
Because they're going to want to gloat.
Yeah, some people will definitely gloat. Yeah.
So thank you for coming on and being such a
thanks for having me.
Really appreciate it. I feel like I learned a lot.
Good.
And what you were saying before, this is the goal of the show, is to I feel like the Republicans and the right have made caricatures of the left, and that's how they see us, as like not real people, but like as like we take our kids to drag shows in school libraries and whatnot. They've made us into something we are not, and I feel like the way to counter that is to show them who we are.
Yeah.
And rather than, argue with that, just, show them who we are. So in that light, tomorrow, just for those who are listening or who are going to listen later, we're going to have a really special episode tomorrow. We're going to have a panel of women who have had abortions and explain why they had abortions. Actually, it'll be tomorrow and Wednesday. We had to actually have 2 panels because we had so many women with stories to tell. And all the stories are unique, and none of the stories are I chose it as an option for birth control. Their stories are very difficult. Some, for various reasons. Some of it was to save their life, and some of it was to save their quality of life. But every one of them, you can't look at the stories and say that it was unnecessary. So, if you have the time tomorrow to either download it or and listen to it later, or to come and join us live. Anybody that's out there still or will be out there, that's tomorrow's and Wednesday show. So if not, happy Thanksgiving. Don't murder your relatives.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Tamerius.
Okay, I just